we need to talk about James. Which James? All of them. Okay, let me turn this around. It seems a little bit complicated with all the names and numbers, but we'll go through it. So in 1406, James Stuart became James I, King of Scots. Now, he was assassinated, but it was okay because he had a son and he was called James and he became James II. He was a nasty piece of work. He was killed, he was only a young man. He was standing next to a cannon that exploded, took out his femur, and he bled to death. But it was okay because he had a son and he became James III. And James III was killed at the Battle of Socky-Burn, but it was okay. Well, it wasn't okay because his son was probably had something to do with it. His son became James IV. Now, James IV was having a bit of a fight with the armies of Henry VIII down in England, and he lost. He was killed at the Battle of Flodden, but it was okay because he had a son, and he was called James V. James V did have a son, and funnily enough, he called him James, but sadly he died when he was only 1 year old, as did his brother Robert. So they never became king, but his daughter, Mary, became Mary Queen of Scots. Now, she wasn't allowed to be queen for very long because she wasn't called James. That was a joke, by the way. But she did have a son, and guess what? He was called James, so he became James VI. Now, down in England, Elizabeth I, let's put her there, she died in 1603, but she didn't have an heir. So, let's bring it over here. So, James became the first King James of England, James I. It was the same person. James VI of Scotland and James I of England were the same person. Now, he had a son, and annoyingly, he called him Charles. He did have an older brother who died, and Charles became king. And he had a son, and he was also called Charles, so he was Charles II. Now, Charles II didn't have any legitimate children, so his brother took over, and his brother was called James. Now, James was therefore the second James of England, but he would also have been James VII of Scotland. Now, James VII of Scotland, we don't really call him that much. It's just James II of England we know him as. He did have a son, and he was called, guess what? James. Now, he would have been the third James of England had he been king, and he would have been the 8th James of Scotland, but he wasn't. There was a rebellion. They raised a standard to James VIII of Scotland and James III of England in Scotland, but the rebellion was put down. And he had a son, and he was called Charles. James III is who we know as the Old Pretender, because he was never on the throne. And Charles, his son, we know as Bonnie Prince Charlie.